How's everybody doing? Welcome. We have a very good show for you guys tonight. I hope that this is streaming and you can all see and hear me. So just give me a second. Let me just put a comment up and we'll start. Alright, there we go. And there we go. Okay, well, let's begin. So, tonight is going to be a really wonderful topic, and I think that it's a topic that really should be clarified and clear up any misconceptions that tend to be going around about this. And we're going to be talking about Odin. We're going to be talking about Santa, and we're going to talk about Krampus. And then to really think more deeply about this, we're going to talk about myth versus reality, and why I believe that it's not only important to believe in myth as truth, but it's also important to believe in myth from a moral setting, from a setting that teaches a story, from a setting that isn't necessarily literal but actually figurative. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with understanding that first, understanding what we mean by myth. And the reason why we're going to talk about this before we talk about anything else is that there's been some comments that have been going around saying that, Odin doesn't exist, or Santa doesn't exist, or Krampus doesn't exist. And I find all of that quite difficult to believe. I am not only one that would define folklore or any sort of story as absolute truth, but I'm also not going to neglect it as something that's false. And I'd like to begin with a paragraph that was written by Bronislaw Malinowski. Here we go. Alright. Studied alive. Myth is not an explanation in satisfaction of the scientific interest, but a narrative resurrection of primitive reality, told in satisfaction of deep religious wants, moral cravings, social submissions, assertions, even practical requirements. Myth fulfills in primitive culture an indispensable function. It expresses, enhances, and codifies belief. It safeguards and enforces morality. It vouches for the efficiency of ritual and contains practical rules for the guidance of man. Myth is thus a vital ingredient of human civilization. It is not an idle tale, but a hard-worked active force. It is not an intellectual explanation or an artistic imaginary, or artistic imagery, but a pragmatic charter of primitive faith and moral wisdom. These stories are to the natives a statement of primeval, greater, and more relevant reality by which the present life, fates, and activities of mankind are determined, the knowledge of which supplies man with the motive for ritual and moral actions, as well as with indications as to how to perform them. I come to you as Druid Claus, first competent, no longer a novitiate, and spent several years as a novitiate. and it feels good to now actually move into a different level and style of teaching. I want to say that I think that when we talk about myth versus reality, and I think that some of the comments went as such where, well, Krampus came out of folklore in the Middle Ages, and therefore Krampus is not to be believed, right? And then there was some counterpoints made with other comments that said something like this: well, I disagree because, the minute that the story is told is the minute that it is true. That there had been some account where someone had reported, because that's really what the word myth means. It means a report, right? Somebody giving a report. Like if you were a store detective or something of that nature, you worked in a store and someone had stolen something and you had to prosecute. Not in Philadelphia, because everybody gets off free here in Philadelphia. But you worked actually in a conservative area where they enforced the law, and you weren't soft on crime. You would write a report, and then that report would be then given to someone who would look over the report and ensure those statements that you made were true, and then use logic and reason to deduct and make those deductions that were true and were not. So that's what myth is. It simply is a report. So the counter argument was, wait a second, hold on. Someone or many at some time, and this was the Krampus argument going back and forth on the Druid circle, said, look, no, you have to believe that Krampus does exist. So where does a Druid find oneself when, thinking about medieval folklore? Well, first of all, you have to dig back. Where did that folklore come from? Now, a lot of people would say, well, it just came about in the Middle Ages. No, that's false. That is not true. Krampus and the story of Krampus actually goes back to a pre-Christian era, a time of the first Iron Age, actually, to be quite honest. And what ends up happening is that there were stories and reports up in the Netherlands from someone named Krampus. Krampus. That is Grumpus, sometimes with an A. Krampus was accompanied during the winter solstice, accompanied his antithesis, and they both had unusual abilities, more like Superman abilities. They were able to jump towers. They were very fast and speedy. They just had this superhuman ability, right? And most of it was speed. Now that is quite important. That was quite important. And the reason that's quite important, because if we look into the Netherlands and we look into the history of Krampus, well, we find that this story is not just something that came out of the Middle Ages. So those of you on the Druid Circle saying that, oh no, it's just a Middle Age story, you're telling lies. It doesn't. It actually comes from a much greater story in the pre-Christian era. And not only that, but we have document after document after document and archaeological evidence and folklorists who will support this. Now, that being said, I think the most important part of the Krampus story is speed. Because it is speed that joins the story of Krampus and his antithesis, okay, that would accompany him on a journey during the winter solstice. And basically would not hurt children, but kidnap children. Now this is super important. This is super, super, super important. Because kidnapping children was, I mean, even today, kidnapping children and you know, human trafficking, especially child trafficking, is very, very common. It always will be, it always is, and it always was. There are some very sick, twisted people out there that, you know, are doing this demonic act of taking children and using them as slaves for either work or sex or any of that matter. So this historic property of enslavement and hiding children, you know, it really begins to talk about the idea of hiding presents under the tree. You know, where the present is the child, right? The child is the present, right? The child is the present. The child is what is special about the coming of the new son. It is the newborn. It is the child. And so if we hide that child and stick a child in a sack, then the antithesis would not take children and put them in sacks, but would take children out of sacks and return them home. And so the story of Krampus is a very, very old one. More importantly, is why this idea of Krampus, you would think, who happens to be a demon, not an evil demon, just a demon, a good demon. You say, good demon, Claus, are you nuts? No, because the best part about being a druid or a competent, I should say, I'm not a practitioner yet, but a competent of the, as I'm no longer a novitiate, a competent of the old religion, is that you begin to understand the variety of demonic energies, a variety of demonic, in a sense of our understanding of what demonic is. You know, that negative presence, right? And then a presence of, say, angelic, if you will, just for the sake of using a common word, of positive qualities and positive energies. So when you take these forces and you divide them into two, you understand that one cannot exist without the other. And I think it is faulty. It is faulty, I think, and actually quite sad that, and this is no fault of those who practice the old religion, or practitioners of the old religion. This is no fault of them, but I feel it's a fault of the Catholic Church in some respects, that they would erase a negative presence with a positive presence. Because when you show the two together, especially during this time, especially during a time where it's almost absolute black outside, and we're just waiting for the white to come back. It's a time where absolute darkness is ever present, and that absolute brightness is going to begin to show, right? It is a return of the sun. It is a return of the light. It is a return of things that are bright. But you cannot have that return of something without displaying a negative feature. And I think that the idea of Krampus, and then later in the medieval times, the idea of Krampus, having both together, so that instead of just Santa Claus writing a good and a bad list, right? Instead of Santa Claus doing that, you actually have two deities, and they were deities in a sense. You have two deities that are showing you the routes that one could take. Now, going back to the idea of those hidden presents under the tree is what the bad kids' fate would land them. They would be those hidden treasures, because Krampus or Krampus would then take that child and keep them in the sack until they were proven that they could return and say, I'm so sorry to whoever they offended, and then, you know, were then given back. In rare cases would they be given back, but it was still possible. You see, this idea of child slavery or child trafficking is a story that is so powerful in the Christmas legend. Because if you think about it, the pawn shop, you go and you sell your most precious things because you are not able to survive on your own anymore, and you need, if I hate to say it, money. I would say money, but I would actually like to use the word cattle, but I won't use that not to confuse you. I'll just call it money for now. You needed money or financial gain, and in order to have that, you would be rewarded if you sold your child into human trafficking, and then you didn't know what happened to that child. The reason why the pawn shop is such a very important part of the Christmas story is because Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas or Sinterklaas, would be the redeeming deity of the season, and would return the child back home to the family, because that was the hope, that was the goal. But it didn't stop human trafficking. It just simply maybe pushed a brake on it, temporarily. It didn't mean the car would stop forever. It just meant that the car had stopped temporarily. It would interrupt time. Well, when Krampus basically left and was no longer part of the Christmas tradition, you were only left with Santa Claus, and when you were left with Santa Claus would be the decider of who was good and who was bad, who was nice and who was naughty. And so there would be this list, right? Isn't it interesting that we write Christmas lists today? Who's getting those gifts? You give gifts to those who have been good to you. So that this idea of Krampus only being part of medieval legend is absolute nonsense. There is no archaeology that supports it. There's no folklore that supports it. There's no myth that supports it. Krampus has been a part of the story from the very, very beginning. And so has Saint Nicholas, who happened to be Claus. Krampus and Claus. Claus was the antithesis of Krampus, of Krampus. Krampus was the antithesis of Claus. And so, you had both of them riding through the air, and in the original story, not with reindeer, not with horses, but in the original story, they would just have speed. And that speed, that being able to, leap tall buildings and run faster than a locomotive, that those superhuman strengths are what gave them those gifts, those supernatural gifts, gave them the ability to move about the night in such a way where they were able to give merit and demerit equally, and based on, who deserved what. Now, the whole idea of coal and all that stuff, that came at a much later time, right? It came at a much later time with Black Peter, and which is very interesting, Black Peter, because then you have Saint Peter, right? So really, the stories in the Christmas stories, if you will, always dealt with a positive and negative sort of energy. And like I told you from the beginning, as a Druid, true Druid, you must believe in these stories figuratively, and also literally, because then you not only get a chance to experience the story, you also get a chance to teach the story for, as it was said earlier, moral value, ethical value. Slancha. So Santa Claus and the story of Santa Claus really disturbed the Catholic Church. Once the story of Krampus and Santa Claus, because Santa Claus, as you know, Klaus or Niklaus or Neoclaus, which is my holy name, my religious order's name, Niklaus, it means victory of the people. Not one who is victorious over the people, but one who champions for the people, right? So what ended up happening in the Netherlands is that Santa Claus basically got so popular, and the story of Saint Nick got so popular, and we're talking about this idea of this bishop coming from the Middle East, the desert, moving up north, and ending up to be Santa Claus, right? Those stories had already existed. They just ended up blending them together as time went on. And they knew how to do it because the people weren't educated. Most people were not noble. Most of the people were just, they were farmers, whatever the case was. They were artists, they were artisans, they knew their vocation, they knew it well, and they that's what they did. But more importantly, it was sort of a negative thing, because you were able to manipulate people into believing whatever, and still today we do that. We are able to manipulate the public. We do it through journalism, we do it through politicians, we do it through local leadership, and we're able to get and social media. We're able to get people to think and believe what we want them to believe. But what I like to do is I like to try to at least back up everything I say, like I did earlier, with my notes, if you will. Not just saying that I'm making up this as an opinion, but actually using the stories and going back. So Saint Nick became so popular, and then even became more popular in the Christian era. That he actually became more popular than Jesus of Nazareth. So, because Jesus of Nazareth is the God of the Christians, at least in triune, with the Spirit and with the Holy Spirit, or the Holy Ghost, I should say, and then also, and that brings also with the German folklore, the Holy Ghost, Geist, and then also Adonai, who is the Father, the All-Father of the Christians. That Saint Nick became more popular than the baby Jesus story, and the church couldn't have that. The church was like, we can't have this. We can't have this Saint Nicholas. We can't have this Saint Nicholas more popular than our story. It couldn't. It couldn't happen. It couldn't happen. Slancha. So what they did was they backtracked the Saint Nicholas story. They erased Krampus, and they made him, Claus, and they made him a saint, and tried to separate the Claus story from the baby Jesus story, and they did for a while, up until the early 1900s, and then after that, when Coca-Cola came into play, Coca-Cola then blends the Saint Nick story into Christmas all at the very same time, and therefore we have Saint Nicholas at Christmas, which is the birth of the baby Jesus, rather than his own day. December 6th, I believe, and 5th with Krampus. And then the nights prior to that following up for Krampus night, or Krampusnacht. So when we start thinking about, the triune deity, the God of the Christians, then we must think about the God of the Christians in a way then that is separate, to kind of, not take the power of Saint Nick and make Saint Nick much more powerful than the baby Jesus, but more importantly, to take Nicholas, who we are now, who I don't believe, and a lot of, I'm going to get hell for this. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to get a lot of hell for this. Talking about hell, Krampus is the child of hell. H-E-L, not H-E-L-L. So we have this story, right? We have this story, and we have this story, and it continues to beg the question, then, if Saint Nick was not Jesus, and Saint Nick was not Krampus, and Saint Nick then, or Santa Claus then, took over the job of Krampus and Saint Nicholas himself, and just blended everything into one, then how did Saint Nicholas and Odin share a relationship? And I'm sorry for saying Odin, I really do appreciate saying Lord Odin. Well, it's very simple. Odin, Adonai, and Adonis all come from one common etymology, and that is the gut, good. Now, I would actually say that I'd also like to tie in the Dagda to this, but I'm not going to. Just to keep it simpler. Remember, each of these episodes are basically an 8-hour course, so I try to take 8 hours and put them into an hour, so it's pretty difficult to do. Slancha. So, remember that the triune deity, or the Trinity, or the Holy Trinity, if you will, involves Adonai. Adonai is the thunder god of the Hebrews and the All-Father to the Christians. Okay? That is the Father. You know, when Jesus is on the cross, he says, Father, Father. You know, he's talking to Adonai. Adonai, Odin, and Adonis all have that particular sort of feel, and that's how the baby Jesus, the child Jesus, the child, relates to Odin. Not necessarily saying that the child is Odin, but to say that Adonai, God, if you will, the God of the Christians, and All-Father, if you will, and Adonis and all that, then that begins to merge with the St. Nicholas story, and then the look of St. Nicholas, or Santa Claus, becomes that of someone who would live in Northern Europe. Right? The white beard, the very masculine presentation, you know, whatever is man is this All-Father, this Adonis, this you know, this deity who leads us, right? Well, it just so happens that usually that it is so that the All-Father, if you will, always appears at wintertime. That's his time. That's why you have Father Christmas. You know? So I don't necessarily believe that Odin is Saint Nicholas. I do believe they share some of the same stories, but remember, in the original folklore, there was no reindeer involved, and we learned that from the Krampus story. They just were fast. That was their godlike ability. And that in itself is the story. That in itself is the story of Christmas, is the story of winter. The idea that we need to fight human trafficking, the idea of the pawn shop, the 3 gold balls on the pawn shop's doors, you know, the 3 things, or the story of Nicholas where where he goes and he from the Christian story where he steals money from the church and gives it to the poor so that they don't have to sell their children into slavery, where in pre-Christian times they would be very, very, they would come from money. They would be nobility, and they would take that money and give it to families who were struggling, where their only out would be to sell their child, to sell their goods for money. I wonder, though, and this is something that's very interesting. We always blame the child. We always blame the child. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong or right. I'm just saying. But who really is to blame here? Who really is the victim? The victim are the parents. They're the victim. And so they are the ones who what? They're the ones who sell the children. That's why the children are confiscated by Krampus and given back with Claus. So I hope that I put some sort of sense into this wintertime story, and sort of within an hour talked about 8 hours of material in such a way that you were able to be close enough to it where you understood how these tie into one another. But I'm also going to say this, that we must believe in these myths as real, as true, as really, not just really real, but real, as true stories. And at the same time, also see them from a lens of what are they saying to us figuratively. That doesn't necessarily mean that the myth, the magic, or the occult and the magic don't exist. It's saying that they do exist, and that's exactly what I'm arguing for, that they do in fact exist. The gods exist. The God of your understanding exists. Let no one tell you otherwise. But just know that everyone has a different perspective, and coming from a different vantage point, sees everything differently. With that, I am Druid and Claus, first competent, and I just would like to say thank you very much for watching, and I'd like to give you all a blessing. May the gods bless you. May the gods keep you. May the Fae shine the light upon you. May the Metaphysical shine the light upon you. And may your ancestors remain with you forever and ever. World without end, Gidawen. Thank you all. And join me next time. I will like your questions. Place them in the comments, and I'll answer them after this feed and this live stream. And I hope that now you could have a little different opinion on what's going on during wintertime, other than the wild hunt. Alright, take it easy everyone. Gidawen. Be it thus, be it thus. Ta she fear. Ta she fear. Est le mogui. And that is Aranit. To light your torches and keep your torches lit throughout the night, especially as these nights get darker and darker until the new sun is born.